Hello, and welcome back to Her Poison Pen. On the first full moon of this blue moon month, we heard from Anita Stewart about point of view and female rage in modern dark fiction. On this cool new moon, we're going to continue our discussion by asking, just whose story is this anyway? Now, you might scratch your head and wonder when I tell you that even the most accomplished writers sometimes stumble on the idea and the issue of who owns a story. You would think that a skilled writer, an author, would have a firm grip on her protagonist and would have a solid plan for the role of her primary character. And you'd think she'd have all this in place before she even began writing. But sadly, or maybe playfully, that's not always the case. There are times when characters seem to have minds of their own, and they have very little intention of following the instructions of the writer. Now, how does this happen? Well, consider for a moment a couple of cases. First, a writer might start out with, say, a young, naive woman as her protagonist. Maybe the writer has plans for that young woman and wants her to grow and become stronger by putting her into conflict with an older, more experienced, up to no good older woman. Now, the writer wants the young protagonist to learn to stand on her own as she battles the antagonist. But then something strange happens. The writer starts having more fun with the antagonist, the evil older woman, than she does with the naive young girl. The antagonist is funnier, has a snarky, catch me if you can attitude, and pulls a couple of outrageous stunts that both shock and delight the writer. Before she knows what's happening, the writer is giving the antagonist the queen's share of the ink. Number two, here's another way that secondary characters trick writers into giving them the story. And it has to do with our emotional attachment to our characters. I had this problem when I started to write a current novel, Then We'll Be Safe. The novel follows two young women through a series of hellish experiences. They commit crimes, they run from crimes, they are accosted by both animals and humans and beasts and animals, and they're cold, they're wet, they're exhausted, they're hungry, and they're wounded. Now, in the beginning, these girls really don't know each other very well, and they really don't like each other. But in order to move through these experiences, they have to stick together and they have to help each other. So the girls have a plan to get out of their dire situation, and this is how they plan to get out of it. One girl has a kindly grandmother, and they figure if they can just make it to grandma's house, then they will be safe. Crystal comes from a horrible background. She lives in a garden shed behind her mother's filthy trailer. Her mother is a drunk and a sex worker, and her mother's live-in boyfriend is a drug addict, and he's been sexually abusing Crystal since she was 6 or 7 years old. Crystal can barely feed herself. She has no friends, and she's bullied and humiliated by the kids in her high school. Now, the other girl, Majorca, comes from a solid, middle-class, working family in Canada with two parents who cherish her. Majorca is a cheerleader. She dates the captain of the hockey team, and she is looking forward to marrying her sweetheart and having two beautiful babies and a white picket fence. Then all hell breaks loose. When I started writing this novel, Crystal was by far and away my favorite character. I ached for her. I wanted to just reach out and hug her. I wanted to buy her a hot meal. I thought she was my protagonist for sure. But, and yeah, Majorca was just kind of a fluffy little goofy girl who giggled at the wrong time. Unfortunately, the piece was not coming together, and I needed some help. So I called a writing buddy of mine, and this is a friend who writes screenplays for Hollywood, and he does episodes for TV series. And I said, would you read this and tell me what I'm getting wrong in this book? It's just not working. And he zeroed in on my issue immediately. He said, Jess, who has the most to lose in this story? And who has the farthest to fall? Wow, what an eye opener. Clearly, Majorca would lose the most because of the decisions the girls would make. She would lose the family, her boyfriend, the white picket fence, the whole shebang. Crystal was already at rock bottom. The only thing that could happen for her is that she would go up. But for Majorca, a girl from a good home and a promising future, her path could only spiral downward. So how do you, as the storyteller, decide who gets that valuable ink? Who gets to own the story and who must serve in the secondary role? Well, here's what you do. You ask yourself this important question: which character has the most to gain or lose during this story? Another way to ask this is, which character has the greatest arc over the course of the story? Now, each of your major characters should experience an arc. That is, they should each start in a state of being and end in a state of being that has been changed as a result of what they've experienced during the course of the story. Now, not every character in a novel needs an arc, but each main character does. And an arc is the internal growth and development of a character. Here's another example from my own work. In the mystery Blood on a Blue Moon, the protagonist, bad girl, an extreme loner, Schaefer Blue, has a lot to lose if things don't go her way. And spoiler alert, sort of, they don't. And she loses a lot. She also has a tremendous arc in the course of this story. At the end of the story, she still can't hold a job. She can't hold a boyfriend. She can't even hold her place in line at a liquor store. But she has softened a bit, and she has learned the value of community over living life as a lone wolf. Two questions to ask yourself as you determine which of your characters earns the most of that valuable ink on the page. Who has the most to gain or lose in this story? And which character will experience the greatest emotional change, the greatest arc over the course of this story? Now, what happens if one character has the most to gain or to lose, but a secondary character experiences the greatest emotional arc? How do you handle that? For right now, I'm going to suggest that you give the character who has the most to gain or the most to lose the role of protagonist. Let their struggles and their journey drive the plot. At the same time, make sure that you give that secondary character enough of a personality and enough strength so that she can be the protagonist in your next novel. So, those are a few ideas to consider when you're trying to decide whose story is this anyway. Now, let's do what we always do. Let's go to our desk and put words on paper. And of course, stay witchy.